Good evening. My name's Phil Spaugy, and I'm privileged to be in the beautiful Wisconsin Club in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to speak on the 19th Indiana at Gettysburg, particularly the fight at the last stand at the barricade in Gettysburg. So I'm from Dayton, Ohio area, so it's a Buckeye speaking in Wisconsin about a bunch of Hoosiers. So that's what you're going to have tonight. Anybody wants to catch it on Facebook, we'll be on Facebook Live on the Milwaukee Civil Roundtable page.
Thank you.
Good? Yep, good.
Tonight, I'm very happy to introduce Phil Spaugy, who will be speaking to us on the crucial stand of the Iron Brigade on July 1st at the Battle of Gettysburg. Phil has extensively studied the soldiers, battles, and campaigns of the famous Iron Brigade of the West, particularly the 19th Indiana and their actions at the Battle of Gettysburg. Phil is a retired General Aviation Services Company owner and lives in Vandalia, Ohio, with his wife, Amy, and a house full of cats. He now serves as senior editor for the Military Images magazine and as a historical consultant for Civil War News magazine. Tom and I have known Phil for many years through our membership in the North-South Skirmish Association, and he can easily say that he has fired nearly every type of American Civil War firearm, and I'm sure he owns a good many of them too. So please welcome Phil Spaugy.
Wow, what a great venue, especially for an old aviation guy. Billy Mitchell is a aviation hero of mine. I live about 10 miles from the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. My business was on Dayton International Airport. We just sold our last operation in December, so for the first time in 52 years, I'm out of the aviation business. And yes, I started when I was 10, so anyhow, I'm glad to be here. I really am. This is a real privilege. Lance Hurtigan means a lot to me. I have competed against him and admired his scholarship for 50 years, almost 50 years. We're both members of the NSSA. We both are members of good Iron Brigade units, his being the 6th Wisconsin, of course, mine being the 19th Indiana. So this is going to be a good talk. I hope you guys enjoy it. It's an action that I think has been under study. The first day of Gettysburg, a lot of people don't understand that of the crucialness of the 15 or 20 minute stand on Seminary Ridge. But before I get started, a couple of things. How many of you know Eric Wittenberg? Everybody knows Eric Wittenberg. How many of you realize that he is undergoing a tremendous health crisis right now? About 18 months ago, Eric was diagnosed with cancer, all his bone cancer. Shortly after that, he has had a series of strokes, confined to a wheelchair. He has lost complete use of his right side. It's not a good situation. Chances are he'll never write another book again. He was our company attorney. He was my personal attorney, and I did a lot of work with him on some of his books. Financially, we have set up a GoFundMe for Eric and Susan. Their financial situation is not good, mainly because a couple of years ago, before he was ill, they drained their account to take care of his mother in a nursing home, not knowing that he would be faced with this. You can Google up GoFundMe or Eric Wittenberg. Prayers are appreciated. Dollars are appreciated. Prayers probably more than dollars right now. But, keep him in your thoughts. He's a good man and has given a lot to Civil War scholarship, as you all know. I have over here on the stage a Hardy hat, a pair of gaiters that you can look at later, had to bring it. And also there's some propaganda on the table for the Adams County Historical Society Museum, which I'm heavily involved with. It's the new museum in Gettysburg. How many people have been to the new museum? How many people have been through the immersive Cotton Crossfire, the house? Is that cool? We did the live fire for that sound down at Fort Shenandoah, the NSSA National Range. November day with 6 guys. We shot in boards and cannons and glass and tin for the sound crew. So when you hear that sound in there, that is live Civil War firearms being fired. So that's all I have now. I'll see you guys later. Now, one other thing, I gotta do this. I just gotta. Ohio State Buckeye fans, raise your hands. Whoa, wait, no. Luke Fickle, Buckeye. Is he not Buckeye? Right? Rufus Dawes, was Rufus Dawes a Buckeye?
Ben Fish was a Buckeye.
Okay, there you go. Okay, we'll just leave all that right there for a night. Okay, here was made our last hopeless stand to fight the site barricaded rails, July 1st, 1863. That day, July 1st, 1863, it was all about time, wasn't it? Right from the very beginning, it's all about buying time. Buford's Great Delaying Act, which obviously Eric wrote the book on. The action of the morning of July 1st and even into the afternoon was all about buying time for the Army of Potomac to get to position and to keep hold of the key terrain. A little bit of a refresher of how the day unfolded, and I know many of you know this, so we'll go through it fairly quickly. Obviously, this is the Iron Brigade that has come on the field. They've advanced from the Seminary Ridge Museum, which would be right here, over East McPherson's Ridge, and they are basically crushing Archer's Brigade, rolling them back across Willoughby's Run, and capturing a large number of them, including James Archer. Okay, that's how we set the stage in the morning. After that action, there was a lull in the battle, a couple-hour lull. Not much was happening. The Iron Brigade, less than 6 Wisconsin, because 6 Wisconsin this time was over at Railroad Cut. And they would not rejoin the rest of the brigade until the evening of July 1st on Cobb's Hill. But the 4 regiments were basically under some artillery fire, but it really was a pretty quiet midday lull. Sergeant Major Asa Blanchard, 19th Indiana, in fact, was tasked with breaking up 400 Confederate muskets or rifled muskets or rifles in Willoughby's Run. That's where Tom right there. That's just anyhow. So we got a midday lull. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everything is going to change. This is when Heath's division, soon to be under Pettigrew, but make their advance against the Iron Brigade and the rest of the 1st Corps. We're going to focus on where the Iron Brigade was, and it's really important for you to realize as we set this up, the tremendous disparity in numbers that the 19th Indiana and the 24th Michigan faced that day. Almost a 2-to-1 differential between the number of men that Pettigrew had and the 11th Fort Pratt and the 11th North Carolina versus what the 19th and the 24th Michigan had. Terrain played a big factor too. You'll notice that the 19th Indiana's left flank was in the air. And you'll notice the Bill was back on the backside of East McPherson's Ridge. How many people have been on the battlefield, first day battlefield? Okay. So that's great, because I can, I'm not going to say much more. You know the terrain. How many of you have been down where the 19th Indiana's monument is? A lot of times it'll get driven by if it was down in the hole, okay? But that was a real problem. And so they had no left flank support. And actually in the morning, after Archer's brigade had retired, either Admiral Doubleday or Solomon Meredith had reversed the 19th and 24th and put the 19th out in the left flank. I think they did that because the 24th Michigan had not really seen any heavy combat yet in the Civil War. And I think that Saul or Admiral Doubleday put the experienced regiment out in the left flank. They made several attempts to pull back. They went to Abner and said, you know, we're in a hole, we'd like to pull back. Abner was pretty much fixated on holding the position that John Reynolds had established for him before he was shot. So the barricade of rails, and we'll get into this just a little bit deeper, but it's a very important thing. How many have you even heard of the barricade of rails or know where it's at? It's very, very, very important. It's very, very underreported. If you read DORs, which we're going to go through, I'm going to show you a lot of references, regimental commanders, but it was in front of the Seminary Ridge Museum. I'm sure a lot of you have been there, okay? Where the parking lot is, and down in front was an open grove of trees, much like the McPherson's Woods or Herbst Wislaw was. And Abner Doubleday, our hero, how many Abner Doubleday fans in here? Oh, come on. Look, I know he had bad hair, okay? Man, you know, I'm an Abner Doubleday fan. And I really believe he's a solid soldier. I believe if you look at his record before Gettysburg, you'll see that he was a very dependable commander, whatever level he commanded. Some good quotes on him from some of his soldiers. He's a man of unquestionable bravery, cool and clear-sighted on the battlefield, and handles his troops under fire with the same composure he would exhibit at a review or parade. Pretty strong, right? Okay. The direction of affairs could not have fallen in better hands. His dispositions were the best possible, and he enjoyed the confidence and respect of troops to the fullest extent. But I had to put in, you know, a negative comment. And Charles Wainwright, who was the commander of the 1st Corps Artillery, didn't like Abner. He said, I had no confidence in Doubleday and felt he was a weak reed to lean on. And then Abner would say, I now gave orders to fall back, and this was after Pettigrew was making his attack. And this Emeritus Brigade, which would have been Biddle's Brigade, covering the movement by occupying the entrenchments in front of the seminary, I had directed to be thrown up as a precaution measure to assist in holding the new position. So the morning of July 1st, as Robertson's division came on the field, last division of the 1st Corps to get on the field, they paused, they stayed at the seminary area for a while. They started putting the barricade up that Abner wanted to put up. This map is Abner's map, thanks to Lance. He had it in his files. It's very interesting. It shows, he drew this after the battle, and it shows the positions of Cutler's Brigade, and obviously Mary's Brigade, and then the Hearst Woods, and Biddle's Brigade here. And it also shows the seminary, and the slight barricade of rails is right there, is what that is. And the 11th Corps is still down here. So we'll talk about the 11th Corps in a little bit. Lance, actually this is a series of 4 maps, isn't it, Lance, that he did. Lance, years ago when I was working on some things, graciously let me use and have copies of it. This is kind of another map that I put together and drew where the barricade was. It didn't extend from the Chambersburg Pike all the way down to the Fairfield or Hagerstown Road, but it certainly was in front of the seminary, kind of right. They described it as being right inside the edge of the grove of trees. And you can see that in this map that Scales Brigade and Perrin Brigade is on the advance, and Lane's Brigade is going to be occupied here by John Buford's cavalry, Gamble. A lot of people want to know what the barricade looks like, what it looked like, what it was made of. Tim Smith and I have worked on this, and we really feel that this famous picture of the 3 Confederate prisoners, which is taken probably within 100 yards of the right side of the barricade, shows some of the material that the barricade was made of. Makes a lot of sense that they would repurpose it by carrying it, 50 yards to go to their position there. So we're going to go down through some of the commanders of the great First Army Corps and show you. I want to show you their references to how important this barricade was. So the next time you go to Gettysburg, you can take some time and go to these locations and kind of visualize what happened there. First, Thomas Riley, commander of the 3rd Division in the 1st Corps. Everybody knows Thomas because he's the one that was cashiered after the battle for supposedly being intoxicated. But if you read what he stated, he said the 1st Brigade fell back firing and reached a cover of rails, hastily thrown up by some other troops from the seminary. Here it remained together with some men of the 1st Division, fighting desperately until the time was afforded to the most of our other troops, to the artillery, and to the ambulances to withdraw to the rear. Pretty important. Would you agree? Like 15 or 20 minutes maybe, they were there. And the actions kind of dovetailed each other. Initially, when they're falling back from the Seminary Ridge, it's because they're being pursued, they're being pressured by Pettigrew's division. But they ran out of steam. You know that the 26th North Carolina and you know the 11th North Carolina were pretty much shot to hell in the post-Wood lesson. They were done. By the time they reached the East McPherson's Ridge, they went to ground, they were out of ammunition, they had taken tremendous casualties. And on the left flank, the other two Confederate regiments had held up pretty well by Bedford's Brigade too. So they were ordered to halt, and we had another lull in the battle, probably, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes, while the guys in the 1st Corps were able to get back. This is from the history of the 121st Pennsylvania Volunteers. And again, you can see that the order was given to fall back shortly about 4 o'clock. And that is important to think about. We know that the attack of the afternoon with Pettigrew and Heath started about 3. So the compression of time is now an hour. I'm probably going to talk longer than what it took for this whole episode to take place. And I think that's important for you to try to understand the time factor. I thought this was pretty funny. The distance across the country to the Lutheran Seminary was nearly a quarter of a mile, partly over open fields, and the time made by the 121st getting to the cover of the wood beyond was remarkable. Probably the best on record. I bet it was. Once inside the wood and abreast of the cemetery, where a frail breastwork had been erected along a rail fence, the next stand was made. Another reference. And this is all on the grounds of the Seminary Ridge Museum. And if you've been there, you'll see there's the remnants of what we did. It's been 10 years ago. We rebuilt the section of the barricaded rails and had a couple living history demonstrations. They still have some of the rails on the ground. Theodore Gates, 20th New York State Militia, again, he references, we held a position until the artillery was removed and then fell back slowly behind a barricade of rails, the enemy falling rapidly in great force. The men were rallied and formed behind the barricade and checked the enemy's advancing and finally compelled to retire. He soon advanced again and was able to actually flank the left flank of the barricade. They never penetrated the barricade by frontal assault. They compromised it by getting the left flank. If you go to the Seminary Museum, you know where the St. Master House is, which is just down the street. You know where the YMCA is behind it. That's kind of where the flank attack took place. Corps Colonel Robert Cummins, a great regimental commander. Frosty Sons of Thunder, what they called the 142nd Pennsylvania. Why is this important to me? Because I had an ancestor, William Spaugy, who was on the field with the 142nd Pennsylvania that night. He was shot as they tried to get back to the barricade, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Several of his men were killed or wounded trying to carry his body to safety, and Confederate soldiers were later carried to the field hospital inside the Lutheran Seminary building. Lieutenant Colonel McFarland, you probably all know his story from going to the Seminary Ridge Museum. Museum. Horribly wounded right outside the door of the seminary, shot in both legs, would lose one. 151st was the last reserve regiment in the 1st Army Corps that was ordered into action on East McPherson's Ridge as the Confederates were pushing the Iron Brigade and Bill's Brigade back off the ridge. He made it back to the temporary breastwork, and where his position was right basically where the parking lot is now for the Seminary Ridge Museum, giving you guys a frame of reference. And later he would be wounded, like I said, right outside. He was trying to withdraw past the seminary, and he was shot right outside what would be the northwest corner of the Seminary Ridge Museum. And a number of years ago, we had a wayside marker put approximately where he was shot. He would be the last person to leave the Seminary Ridge Museum Hospital in September of 1863. Colonel Sam Williams, one of my favorite officers because he's a 19th Indiana guy, I know, but at the same time, a solid regimental commander. And they got pushed back off the ridge, and when the Iron Brigade got pushed out of Herbst Woodlot, made a couple stands in between the two ridges, Seminary Ridge and East McPherson's Ridge. But again, his mention, I placed a remnant of my command behind a barricade of logs and rails hastily constructed at the commencement of the fight. And here we made our last and hopeless stand. And Henry Morrow, 24th Michigan, again, he was gravely wounded at the barricade. But in his report, again, he will tell you that they made it to the barricade. So you kind of get the theme here. Pretty important on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, a day that I really believe was the most pivotal day of the whole battle. I really do. And again, William Robinson, South Wisconsin, they made their retreat. Of course, it's pretty familiar with the way they formed on their fighting retreat from East McPherson's Ridge. And they actually were just on the right end of the barricade. There's one solitary artillery piece in Mark Stevens Battery. You'll see it there when you drive down Confederate Avenue off to the right, and a marker. And that's kind of where they were right in front of that battery, which caused them some discomfort. Scales and pair in advance. So we've said the units have come back to the barricade now, okay? We have this pause, and now here come the Johnnies. And these are fresh, absolutely a fresh, big Confederate division. Well-led veteran troops. Have not been in combat at all that day. And you know what the First Corps had been up against all day, and the losses they took. And here's what they look like. Anybody know Rob Hodge? Okay, this is my friend Rob. Took this at Fort Shenandoah a number of years ago. The consummate Civil War living historian and an amazing material historian. But this quote came from John Cook, the 20th New York State Militia. And it's one of the best quotes of a Confederate soldier I've ever seen about how they actually looked that day on the battlefield of Gettysburg. But the important part of what is up there is that they could shoot all right, and as they stood out there in line in the open field and reported a rapid fire of musketry, they gave us no time to criticize their appearance. Our men sprang to their feet and returned their fire, and the battle was on. But that is, when I read that passage, that picture I took probably 10 years ago popped in my head, so that is one good-looking Johnny Reb right there. The attack was led by Pender's division, 6,567 men in the total division, 4 brigades, Scales, Perrin, Lane, and Thomas. Thomas would be attached to support Confederate artillery and Hare Ridge, Lane would be kept real busy by John Buford's cavalry on the Confederate right flank, the Federal left flank. So actually, two brigades that would face off against the barricade is you're going to have the brigades of Scales and Perry. That Pender's division had been famous at A.P. Hill's Light Division. You know, the famous march from Harper's Ferry to Antietam, and led really a great combat unit. Pender was a rising star in the Army of Northern Virginia, and he would be wounded on July 2nd, and then he would die in Stanton, Virginia, on July 18th. Scales Brigade had 1,347 men. These numbers are kind of important to keep in mind. Parent had 1,878 men. Both of these men were they were native North Carolinian and native South Carolinian, and both of them were attorneys. Parent had some Mexican War experience, experienced brigadier generals in the Confederate Army. Parent would be killed the next year at Spotsylvania. The first thing they ran into when they cleared East McPherson's Ridge, and probably one of the most important aspects of this fight, was the artillery of the 1st Division of the 1st Army Corps. And you can see, I should say the 1st Army Corps, under Charles Wainwright, and you can see right here where the artillery pieces were located. Pender's making his attack. There's Battery B, the Iron Brigade Battery, Stevens Battery. Cooper had some guns. Reynolds Battery was split with 4 guns here and 2 guns here. Cooper and Reynolds had 3-inch ordnance rifles. It's important to understand that the effectiveness of the Napoleon guns that Battery B had, 6 of them. And Stevens Battery, 5th Maine Battery, had 6 Napoleon guns too. Because when they came over the ridge, and that's just a picture of Battery B's 2 guns today, they met the fire of these Napoleon Bulldogs, is what the troops would call them. Now the ridge range from where the positions are to East McPherson's Ridge is probably 350 yards. So they met canister fire immediately from these guns. The 5th Maine recorded the number of rounds they fired on July 1st. Again, a compressed period of time. This is probably 3:30, 3:45 in the afternoon. They would fire 57 rounds of canister, probably in 30 minutes. They were outside the barricade. And they're a big reason why the line held on the right flank. The left section of Battery B and Lieutenant Davidson would engage with Scales Brigade. Scales would be advancing right across here. Their left flank was actually a line on the Gettysburg Pike. And the left section, 3 guns, would be turned towards the south and enfilade the left flank, causing Scales to go to ground in this swale. Interesting area, high casualty area. They went to ground, and everybody further than that slight swale. I bet everybody drives by that, just anxious to get into Gettysburg, get to the hotel room, and don't even think about what took place there. 120 men of the Iron Brigade were serving with this battery at Gettysburg. It's important to realize that. From all the different regiments, they had 120 black hats in their ranks. Augustus Buell, who wrote Cannoneer, History of Battery B, which we pretty much know he actually was not in Battery B, but if you read the book, we feel that he had a good friend who related all the stories to him that was in Battery B. Wrote, "Explorer couldn't cross this road alive." And that's just another view of the swale as far as Scales got. This is what Scales would say as he went to ground. Every field officer in his brigade, less one, was wounded or killed. And they never made it any further than right in here. He said, we commenced the descent just opposite the seminary. Here the brigade encountered the most terrific fire of grape and shell on our flank and our front. Flank would be Davidson's guns, the front would be Stevens' guns. Every discharge made sad havoc in our line, but still we pressed on and double quick. Well, that ended pretty quick. Now, I want you to think about the combat effectiveness that was taken away from Scales Brigade for the 3rd, for July 3rd. And I want you to think about the loss. Soldiers is one thing. Let's think about the loss in officers, in non-commissioned officers, the leadership that they lost. Very important. Very important. Perrin was on Scales' right flank, and he had a little easier time of it for a while. Unfortunately, they still took a lot of artillery fire right down the swale. By now, Scales has gone to ground in this area. Of course, these trees weren't there at the time, but he's advancing across there. But what happened to him at about 100 yards from the barricade, he came under what he said the most destructive fire of musketry that he ever experienced. Ever experienced. And this is from the guys from Gettysburg Brigade and the Iron Brigade, from the barricade, what they delivered. Isn't it interesting, when you talk about Civil War firearms, and you talk about the mini ball and the great range of the mini ball and how far it can fire, that the average distance of Civil War combat was 100 yards. The buck and ball round would have been just as devastating, if not more devastating. And that's a whole other talk for another time. Right, Tom? Yeah, you bet. So, anyhow, they were just decimated too. But what he did is he was able to get a couple of his regiments to face to the right and then flank the barricade out and then proceed north along the ridge. And that's what caused the Iron Brigade and Mills Brigade to start to retire. Kind of interesting, in the first volley of musketry, Company K of the 14th South Carolina lost 34 of their 39 men. Again, it would have an effect on July 3rd. This is kind of a view from the barricade we built, looking back across the killing grounds between the barricade and East Seminary Bridge. What a perfect field of fire, and especially for the rifle musket. Opening fire at 100 yards. Now, as the Iron Brigade and Mills Brigade are swept off the ridge, they would move towards the northwest. Actually, their line of retreat would take them into town through Gettysburg Road, okay? They used the railroad cut to kind of an avenue because they were being flanked from their left flank. Makes sense. But this time, remember, they really didn't know where to go, too, because they had approached the field that morning coming crosslots from the Cadore farm. They hadn't come through town. And so they weren't from here, so they were kind of, that added to some of the confusion in town. But I'll tell you this right now, I'm a firm believer that the 11th Corps would fold first. And the 1st Corps kept the door open for the 11th Corps to start to get off the field. One of the reasons that Abner Doubleday, after the best day he ever had in Civil War combat, solid day, you won't find a member of the 1st Army Corps criticize his leadership that day. Well, except for Charles Wainwright, who says, we believe on it. But one of the reasons Meade relieved him, personality conflict probably, was because O.O. Howard got to Meade first in the morning of July 2nd. And basically said, well, the first Corps folded first, Doubleday folded first, and that's why we had to retreat. And Abner lost his command. He would be wounded on July 3rd slightly during the cannonade. Never hold another field command. And I think it's really it's a difficult thing for the rest of his life. He wrote a lot about it, tried to justify it. One of the things about Abner that I think a lot of people, I like to tell them, you know, you have the connection with baseball, which we know is not true. But the one thing he did do, he threw out the first pitch for the blue team in Fort Sumter that morning. He and fired that first cannon. So, you know, he's got that going for him. He threw out the pitch on opening day. One of the little stories about this first day is the last stand of Company D, 149th Pennsylvania Volunteers Headquarters Guard. This is Abner's Headquarters Guard. How many people even know where this little monument is? It's right there at the corner of Fairfield Road and Confederate Avenue. If you're going south on Confederate Avenue, you come past Lutheran Seminary and you have the world's longest red stoplight. Never seems to change. You can't make a right turn because they don't want you to do that there. Just across there, in the yard of the Schultz house, stands this monument. And that's where they made their last stand. Now, they're under the command of Captain James Glenn, and another one of those good, solid combat officers. They held the left flank along with Buford's cavalry there along Gettysburg Road. They were outside the barricade. They were along the stone wall that extended from basically maybe just south of where the seminary is and out to Gettysburg Road. They supported Reynolds' battery section. He fired a couple rounds and he headed back into town. And the monument will tell you that Private James Baldwin was killed there, and he was. And he was taken back home and buried in his home in western Pennsylvania. But this gentleman right here was wounded. And this is what the story is. This is one of those great human interest Gettysburg stories. Sergeant Alexander Stewart would be wounded badly. He would be taken into Gettysburg, be taken to the Myers home, which actually was taken to the Catholic Church, which is down the street from Myers home on Middle Street. House is still there. And he would be nursed for his last 2 days of his life by Sally Myers, a young lady who was a native of Gettysburg, was nursing the soldiers, having a horrible time of it. The things she saw were horrific. And he would die on July 6th. And Alexander's brother, Henry, would come along with his father. And amazingly, even though they lived in western Pennsylvania, near Washington, Pennsylvania, they actually had been natives. They actually had lived in Gettysburg. They came to get his body and take it, bury it back home. And Henry fell in love with Sally. They got married. They got married in 1867. Henry had been a member of the 149th Pennsylvania, but when they were in winter camp in Fredericksburg, he had hit himself in the foot with an axe and cut off a couple of his toes, and so he got mustered out. He was a minister, but unfortunately he would die 11 months, 12 months after they were married. And they had a son, and the son was named Henry Stewart, after his dad. He became Dr. Stewart, a well-respected citizen of the town of Gettysburg, and also one of the founders and presidents of the Adams County Historical Society, which we have the brochures for over here. That's a segue. Very great story. It's a great Gettysburg story. It's a great, and his influence, Henry's influence in the town of Gettysburg, and that this historical society lasts to this day. When you go to the Historical Society, anybody remember seeing the big bone shaper bike that was in there? They had one of those three-wheeled that had to climb up that. Well, that was Henry's bike, so he's got that going for him. We found a lot of neat things in the museum, and one of them was the Company D at 149th did a company history of the war, and it's available online. It's a very nice company book, and we found the copy that Sally had written on to give to Henry. So the 149th Pennsylvania, this is the last part of their story, they get shoved back off the ridge, and they're running down the street, this is Fairfield Road, and up here is the top of the ridge, and the monument to the unit is right there. And Glenn, Glenn is sort of like Tom Hanks to me a little bit. And Second Private Ryan, he's got about 5 or 6 guys, and he rallies them right on the west bank of Stevens Run, which is, you'll go over today. And he says, we're going to fight these Rebs. And they're taking small arms fire from the Rebs coming down the road. And the guys in his unit say, Captain, it's time to go. We got to go now, because we're not going to beat this whole brigade of Rebs coming down the road. So they did. He survived the war. I'd like to kind of end up talking just real quick about some who actually fought on the field that day. This is Lieutenant Andrew Tucker, who's the adjutant of the 142nd Pennsylvania. And his story is really, really poignant. He was wounded not once, not twice, but 3 times. First time slightly, he gave his horse to his friend, a young man by the name of Hoffman, to get back, Jeremiah Hoffman, to get back to the aid station in the Lutheran Seminary building. Then he was shot a couple other times. The last time he was shot in the back, and he would be in the hospital there. Hoffman, of course, he was wounded too, so he was in the hospital there. And the poignant writing that Hoffman wrote as he laid in his hospital bed looking out the window as they buried his friend in the garden of the Seminary Ridge Museum is simply amazing. And that's one thing you've got to understand. When you go to that museum, you park in the parking lot, you go through the door, you're walking on hollow ground. You're walking on ground that have been soaked in blood, and you're walking on ground that these soldiers were initially buried. And I have to think there's probably still some boys there. He wrote that they lined his grave with fence pilings and buried him beside the colonel, Robert Cummings. Remember, he had been wounded and he would die a couple of days later. I was then lying on my bunk, and by lifting my head could see into the garden. I could not assist in the burial, but could look on. They were holding the body over the grave when the head slipped over the edge of the blanket, and the lieutenant's beautiful jet black hair dragged over the ground. The thought of his mother and his sister was called up, and surely could not be called unmanly that a few tears stole down my cheeks. I was watching one of his best friends be buried while he lay wounded in the hospital. Sam Williams would make it out of the battle, fine. He had been shot, actually he was shot in the breast by a spent ball that was saved by a folded up map that he kept. Unfortunately, at the Battle of the Wilderness, the folded up map didn't stop the red cannonball that hit him in the chest. He was killed at the Battle of the Wilderness. Left behind 3 kids. He left behind 6 children, 5 of whom were under the age of 10. He was buried in Selma, Indiana today. Henry Morrow, 24th Michigan, he was badly wounded. Ended up in the Seminary Museum. He found the colors in the barricade in the hands, grasped in the hands of a dead 24th Michigan soldier. He grabbed the colors and he was shot immediately. He would again survive the war. He served in the regular army after the war for a period of time and was very active in the reunions after the war also. This is one of Lance's favorite guys. If you haven't read the book, you need to read the book. Right, Lance?
I do.
I know. His writings, and Lance edited the letters, are just wonderful. He wrote about the barricade. So we had to fall back, and they kept flanking us, and we kept falling back until we got behind a breastwork made of rails. It was only 2.5 feet high, so we got behind it and just mowed down the Rebs. All in front of our regiment, we just mowed them down. That's black hat for you right there. I'm telling you. This picture obviously was taken after he re-upped, as you see, Wisconsin Veteran Volunteers on his hand. John Callis has an interesting story. 7th Wisconsin, he was wounded badly and ended up having some of his men. He ended up by the railroad cut because some Confederate soldiers were taking liberties with everything he owned. They were taking his wallet and taking his spurs, and they were stopped by a Confederate officer, the last name Keenan. And Keenan got Callis into the Seminary Ridge Museum Hospital, and they ended up, Keenan would be captured on July 3rd. He would be a prisoner of war. After the war, they reconnected. They tried to, Keenan wanted to return the spurs that Callis had given him because he got him into the hospital. Callis didn't want him back, and then poor health kept them from never meeting again. They both passed away. Now we'll get into a little math and we're going to get done. This is important to understand the combat effectiveness that was drained from the Confederates on July 1st. You see what Scales was, they had 1,351 men engaged. They lost 545. That came right to Scales' OR's report against the barricade. Percentage-wise, it's a large percentage, but the most important thing was the fact the loss in officers and non-commissioned officers, leadership. Parents, again, the same. It's kind of hard to, parents' estimate is that he had 647 in 1882 that he lost that day. And those come right from his report. You know, Confederate casualty figures are tough because some of these brigades were engaged July 2nd a little bit and again on July 3rd. Pender's division wasn't heavily engaged on the 2nd, except on skirmish duty. They did have some action on the 3rd. Now to our precious Iron Brigade. It says Doubleday's division, but that's, ignore that, that's not right. Because he was not the division commander. The guy who put this together might have been tired. Anyhow, they had engaged 1,485 men, and they lost killed, missing, and wounded 985. Remember, the 6th Wisconsin wasn't at the barricade. So you've got the 4th, the 2nd, so you have the 2nd, 7th, 19th, and 24th. If you look at the casualty figures for those regiments during the battle, the 1st was the day that they were most heavily engaged. The morning fight, except for the 2nd Wisconsin, which suffered a lot of casualties in the Hurst Woods, was not severe casualty-wise on the other 3 regiments. So the bulk of these casualties would have been suffered from 3 o'clock to probably 4:15 on July 1st while they opened the door, and in my mind, really did their part to save the Federal Union that day. You can look at what the numbers were present at the barricade. I came up with 500 men from each brigade were actually present at the barricade after the fighting to get them back to the barricade. Because their losses, the stand at the barricade weren't horrific in casualties in particular. They'd already been shot to hell in the retreat, but they lost a few men. But there was probably only 1,000 men in the barricade. You can add another couple hundred for the men at Stone's brigade, the 143rd Pennsylvania, the 149th Pennsylvania, 150th Pennsylvania, which were in support of Battery B with the 6th Wisconsin and along Chambersburg Road. Time had been purchased, but at great cost for the old First Corps. They lost 6,000 out of 9,000 men engaged the first day. 6,000. The First Corps fought that day with no other protection than the flannel blouses that covered their stout arms. That's a takeaway right there. And this is one of the living history events we had when we rebuilt the barricade back in 2015. We did a pretty good job, I think. And the colors right there, the colors of the 19th Indiana right here. And when we get done today, and you get done, come up, take a look at the colors, and feel free to take some pictures with them if you want to. They're very important, very important. This is the thank you time. And my dear wife Amy gets top billing because I wouldn't be standing up here if she wouldn't keep making me do these things and getting out of town. so she can take care of her cats. Anyhow, And her dad, who is a great longtime friend of Lance's, and I want you to talk about these guys, they started shooting with the NSSA against each other and with each other in about 1961. So you want to meet a couple of the original boys of 1961, there's one right there, okay? And I was a member of the 19th Indiana, and we had some classic musket matches against each other through the years. Lance, besides everything else he does, is a tremendous rifle musket shooter. Alan Nolan, you know his name, obviously, he's the one that really got the Iron Brigade kind of on the map. Even though if you read Bruce Catton, you really can see that Bruce Catton had a love for the Iron Brigade too. Alan Gaff. Phil Davis has the 19th Indiana website where he has listed about every burial place of every man in the 19th Indiana. Mark Storch, I'm sure you guys are familiar with him. Jim Hessler, who's the prolific writer of Sickles, and Pete Georger, and his great friend. He and I have a little historical tour company together. We do some little bighorn stuff. He's really been a great mentor to me. And then to those who wear the black hat yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And the most important part of that is tomorrow. That's why we tell the story. Thank you. This has been an exceptional venue and exceptional dinner too. And I got a cigar. Yeah. And I promised I would say this to Lance as we were talking on the phone. Old black hats never die. They just fade away. Douglas MacArthur had to say it in this room. So there you go. Thank you all. This has been great. Any questions? I'm glad to entertain them if you have any. Go.
Is there a book or two that you would recommend that you think speaks to the importance of the first day?
You know, Fans, his book on the first day is wonderful. David Martin wrote a book on the first day is wonderful. Lance Hurtigan's Iron Brigade at Gettysburg was wonderful. I don't know if you read that. In the Bloody Railroad Cut at Gettysburg that Lance did years ago with Bill Beddoe is wonderful. So any of those are, to me, some of the best books. The book on the fight at the barricade is yet to be written. And someone is pushing me to sit down and write it, so we'll see how that goes. Anybody else? Go.
Can you explain from the early morning, that gap that was there, with all my wounded buddies around, what were the guys doing in that period of time?
You mean the first gap?
Yeah.
Okay. Remember, the first Iron Brigade didn't take many casualties. Let's start there, except for the 2nd Wisconsin. They captured a lot of Archer's guys, so they were going to the rear. Obviously, the 6th Wisconsin had taken care of the threat to the federal right flank. And, you know, it's kind of funny how that battle evolves. It's kind of like this, you know, here we are, we're capturing Archer, but the other side, it was a close thing, what happened around the railroad cut and with the Company's Brigade. So, it's, you know, so that's what happened. And then, you know, they pulled back because they got a bloody nose. They really did. And Lee got on the field and he paused too because he's trying to assess what really is happening because, you know, remember they weren't supposed to bring on engagement. At the same time, Ewell hasn't quite arrived from the north and northeast. So, you know, and the 11th Corps is just starting to come up. Okay? So it's kind of a, you know, you got Reynolds dead, Doubleday and Wadsworth are trying to figure things out. And I think it's good that there was this law that gave time for troops to get on the field. But that's what they were doing. And obviously they got the casualties off the field and established the 8 stations. Obviously Lutheran Seminary was one. The railroad station was another one for the 19th Indiana. So that's what they were doing. Good question.
Other questions?
Yep, good.
Where did the 19th end up on the 2nd and 3rd?
They end up on Culp's Hill.
Oh,
The rest of the night?
Exactly.
Okay.
They weren't engaged. I don't think, they might have one or two guys wounded by Confederate shell fire. I know there's one lieutenant that was badly wounded. You know, the 6th Wisconsin actually got into some pretty heavy combat that late night, July 2nd, when they went over Coffs Hill to help old Pat Green and the Confederate attack on that side. But yeah, they were in those entrenchments there on Coffs Hill by Stevens Battery, right kind of in front of Stevens Battery. Good name, Battery.
Any more?
Thank you again.
Thank you. Bill, I have this certificate of honor presented by order of the General Staff of the Civil Roundtable of Milwaukee. This award is presented to Bill Spaugy for furthering our understanding of the causes and consequences of the American Civil War, the watershed event in our nation's history.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And because we were trying to figure out things you may not have had from us already, since you got a boatload of stuff at the 75th, figure you didn't have a baseball cap.
Oh, man, I like baseball.
You can use a baseball cap.
Also,
Also figured you haven't got one of those.
I will wear that, I think,
Okay.
because remember, we stood in Marietta.
We did.
And
I couldn't find the picture, so I couldn't tell.
I had mine, yes, I did. but
You did?
This will go on my shelf.
That should.
Yep.
That
Yep.
should. All right.
And I appreciate it.
No problem.
This means a lot.
We appreciate that.